I've got a little bit of memory of the Cold War. You do too. The Berlin Wall didn't fall until I was in my 30s, married and a father, so I spent a fair amount of my sentient youth aware of that situation. We didn't understand all of our strengths then in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. We didn't understand how powerful we were. Our enemies did. We've squandered a lot of our power over the last 30 years, but we may still underestimate the sources of our power. Obviously, there's the economic aspect of this ledger. And if you put together the open societies, the affluent Western democracies, their economic weight is still preponderant in the world, much more than everybody else combined.
You're talking about America?
We're talking about U.S., Europe,
yeah.
Japan.
Yeah.
Let's say, the affluent OECD countries, countries that would style themselves as being part of the West. Throw in Israel with that, and the dominance of the dollar is much stronger now than it was in the 60s, the global dominance. I mean, we're going to see just how powerful dollar sanctions are in this little experiment that we're doing with Russia as a consequence of the invasion of Ukraine. Trade influence much stronger than we think. The astonishing rule of the English language, which is not something that can be weaponized, but is part of the greater influence of the U.S. and the Western system, because of all of the culture and science and technology. English is the language for all of that, and that sets the possibilities and the productivity for the future. We've got an enormous amount of power, and probably more than was the case in the 1960s or 1970s. Now, just as in the 60s and 70s, we've got a deeply divided society, demoralized in many quarters, anti-American in some. That poison has been drained in the past, and I've got no doubt that that poison can be drained again. If we look overseas, we see analogies that may be instructive. I mean, look at what's happened in Germany since the invasion of Ukraine by the Kremlin. In about 72 hours, and really mean in about 72 hours, the German establishment put aside its Davos dreams and the fantasies, self-serving fantasies, that it was living by over the previous couple of decades, and made, let's say, initial steps. I won't say that we don't know how lasting they are, but cutting off their new oil and gas pipeline, particularly Nord Stream 2 with Russia, committing to defense buildup, providing offensive weapons to Ukraine, and doing this through a coalition government which wasn't the conservative establishment, but it was the socialists and the Greens. When you're kind of mugged by reality, you can have an attitude change that's really fast. I mean, I hope that we can have an attitude change before we are mugged. We seem to do very well when we're punched in the face and have to respond, but it would be it would be a lot tidier if we didn't have to wait to take the first blow.